water soothed him. He took a deep breath, identifying the smells that had once been so commonplace he scarcely noticed them. Fir and pine, sun-warmed grass and fertile earth, a crisp edge to the breeze, even on a summer day, because the high-elevation basin was ringed by snow-capped peaks. His footsteps slowed as he crested a slight rise. Ahead of him in a shaded grove he saw a sorrel mare and a buckskin gelding. They grazed contentedly, their reins loosely draped over the limbs of sapling oaks. Nearby, 2 blanket-draped saddles rested on the green grass. A sense of déjà vu filled Rafe. He remembered this day. He and Susan had taken the kids for a short ride through the forest, and then they'd come back here for a picnic by the lake. They had enjoyed themselves, singing silly songs they made up as they went along to entertain their 3-year-old son, Kiefer. It had been a near-perfect outing, and they had ended it here because they loved spending time near the water. He eagerly scanned the clearing, his yearning to catch a glimpse of his family so sharp that it made his breath hitch. Drawn by a red-checkered tea towel that fluttered in the breeze, his gaze came to rest on the wicker picnic basket first. The hinged lid was wedged partially open by the protruding neck of a wine bottle that their nanny housekeeper, Becca, had slipped inside to accompany their meal. Oh, yes, he remembered it all so clearly. Susan, in snug faded jeans and a pink cotton blouse, her golden hair caught at the crown with a clip to spill in a silky cascade to her shoulders. He could almost hear the sound of her laughter rippling around him, and smell the little boy's scent of his son, riding double in front of him on the buckskin. After coming here to eat, he had rocked his baby daughter to sleep, while Susan set out the food, and he could recall exactly how his little girl's plump body had felt in his arms. A slight frown pleated Rafe's brow. This was too real to be a dream. He could actually hear the water lapping and feel the breeze caressing his skin. With every step he took, the beach pebbles pressed sharply into the soles of his riding boots. Dreams weren't this vivid. Oh, God, could he dare to hope? Maybe a miracle had happened, and somehow he'd been hurtled back in time. Maybe after all this time his prayers had finally been answered, and God was giving him a second chance. Oh, yes, please. All he needed was just one more chance. This time he wouldn't blow it. He'd put his family first. Nothing had ever mattered more to him than his wife and kids. Nothing. He'd just gotten so caught up in the everyday responsibilities and obligations of being a husband and father that he'd lost sight of what was really important for a while. He'd never make that mistake again. Wanting, needing to believe that this was all actually real, he clenched his hands into throbbing fists and eagerly scanned the clearing. Susan and the kids lay only a short distance away from the picnic basket. The 3 of them were taking a nap on a Navajo blanket he'd spread on the grass for them. Their snuggled forms were dappled with sunlight that filtered through the fir boughs above them. Susan lay on her back with a child on each side of her, her sweet face relaxed in sleep, her lush mouth curved in a slight smile of contentment. His son, Kiefer, had fallen asleep with his arms around her neck, and he still clung to her, his baby-soft cheek pressed to her breast. The 6-month-old Chastity was cradled in Susan's other arm, her tawny curls glistening like drizzles of honey. Rafe walked toward them, a sharp ache stabbing his chest. Dear God, how he loved them. And it had been so long, so very long since he'd seen them. Thank you, God. He wanted to shout and run to cover the distance more quickly. But no, he couldn't shake the feeling that this scene from out of his past might exist only in his imagination. A loud sound or sudden movement might shatter it, like fragile glass. As he moved closer to the blanket, Susan's face grew less distinct. He squinted down at her, wanting to see her more clearly. But no matter how hard he tried, her features remained an elusive blur, framed by a nimbus of golden hair. He came to a stop, staring so hard that his eyes burned. It was like trying to see her through a plate of steam-fogged glass. "Susan," he called softly. "Honey, wake up. It's me, Rafe." She didn't stir at the sound of his voice. He reached a hand toward her, his need to touch her a craving he couldn't deny. Just as his fingertips nearly grazed her cheek, the ground under his feet shifted and seemed to jerk. In a twinkling, his wife and children vanished, and he found himself surrounded by an endless and horribly empty darkness. "Susan? Don't leave again! Susan?" He felt a light touch on his arm, and as he turned, a dizzy feeling came over him. As the sensation subsided, he realized that his surroundings had changed. He was still on the lake shore, only now it was late evening. Susan sat beside him on the grass, and once again he couldn't see her clearly. She was only a shadowy presence, and he knew she would vanish again if he tried to touch her. The knowledge filled him with a sense of hopelessness and pain that ran so deep his bones ached. Her face was a blurred, pale oval in the darkness as she turned to regard him. "What are you doing, Rafe?" she asked softly. "You promised me you'd find someone else to love, that you wouldn't spend the rest of your life alone if something ever happened to me. Now just look at you." He clamped his arms around his knees to resist his urge to reach for her. "I can't, Susan. I know I promised, but I can't. I'll never love anyone but you. Never." Her voice rang with sadness. "Oh, Rafe, you can't go on like this. Life is such a precious gift, and you're wasting it." He closed his eyes. "I don't have a life," he whispered raggedly. "Without you and the kids, I'm just marking off the days. Why can't you understand that?" Silence settled between them, broken only by the gentle sound of lapping water and the night wind whispering in the evergreen trees. Those sounds had once seemed like music to him. Now hearing them only made him hurt, and he wanted to escape. Leaving right then was impossible, though. As long as Susan was there, even in this elusive, heartbreaking way, he couldn't leave her. "It's time, Rafe," she whispered gently, her voice seeming to fade in and out. "You have to let me and the kids go now and move on." Move on to what? He wanted to scream the question, only a lump had lodged in his throat, making it difficult for him to speak. "You keep praying for one more chance," she murmured. "Well, dear heart, now you're getting one. Don't throw it away or mess it up because you're still clinging to ghosts." "Mess what up?" "You'll see." He heard a smile in her voice. "Just open your heart, Rafe. You'll see." Rafe jerked awake in the middle of a snore. For an instant he thought it was the bad dream that startled him, but as the grogginess cleared from his head, he decided it was something else. After 2 years of riding the rails, he had learned to sleep lightly even when drunk. Something wasn't right. He heard nothing except the constant clank of the train wheels and the clatter of the boxcar. He nudged his Stetson back to regard his 4 traveling companions, who sat hunched along the rear wall of the boxcar just as they had been earlier. Only now they all seemed to be staring at something to his left. Shaking off the last trace of sleep, and the haunting dream along with it, he flicked a glance in that direction and did a double take. A girl? He could scarcely credit his eyes. Pushing with the heel of one boot, he sat more erect and turned the full blast of his gaze on her. The shaft of moonlight fell over her. He could see she was a beauty, slightly built, with a wealth of dark hair and that rare milk-white skin you see in pictures but seldom run across in real life. A fragile little flower. Not likely. Fragile little flowers didn't hitch rides on boxcars. She probably had a switchblade in her hip pocket and was just waiting for some poor bastard to mess with her. Well, judging by the interest she was drawing from his fellow travel mates, she wouldn't have long to wait. As if she sensed Rafe's gaze on her, she turned to look at him, and he found himself staring into the biggest, most vulnerable, and most frightened eyes he'd ever seen. He got the oddest feeling, a tight, achy sensation dead in the center of his chest. She ducked her head so fast he had little time to